Hosea chapter 7. And while we're turning there, this last month has been, there's been ups and downs this last month, but, I spent a lot of time in this last month in a hospital, more than I have in my entire life. And so when people are in the hospital, it makes you really think. It makes you just think about your life. There's not a lot to do in a hospital besides watch TV, maybe have a good conversation, like with my wife or whoever is coming to visit. So, there's not a lot of distractions. There's not a lot of things to do. So, it was a really good time for me to think and just recollect on my life. And so that is what kind of birthed this message from all this, from Jude being born and Julia having a blood clot. Just seeing the doctors, they came in, they took her blood pressure, they took vials of blood for different reasons, and she came in with several different symptoms. Her leg was really swollen, she was dizzy. She had several different symptoms, and from the doctor's diagnosis, they were able to figure out that she had a blood clot in her leg. And so when we're reading here in Hosea, we see we have a great physician in our life. And looking at, as we begin to read in Hosea, in verse number 1, chapter 7, verse number 1, it says, "When I would have healed Israel," this is God speaking, "then the iniquity of Ephraim was discovered, and the wickedness of Samaria. For they commit falsehood, and the thief cometh in, and the troop of robbers spoileth without." So God is speaking, and he said, when I would have healed Israel. God, as I just said, is our great physician. And so in this chapter, he was saying that he would have healed Israel if it weren't for these things. And today, when we're reading our passage, we will see that God, our great physician, he's about to diagnose 4 symptoms that Israel was facing. We're going to be looking at 4 symptoms that the great physician was, and honestly, when we look at it to the end, it was not a very good diagnosis. And we'll get to that in a second. Because the diagnosis was very gloom. And so, look, before we look at these symptoms, we can see that all these symptoms, they're going to be metaphors. And when we were in the hospital, Julie and I, anytime the doctor came to us, he didn't speak on his own level. He didn't say that, he didn't use all these doctor terms and say that this is what's wrong, this is what's wrong, this is what's wrong. The doctor, he was like, okay, your heart, he didn't tell me this particular artery, he didn't say anything like that, but he was at my level, and he came and told us what was going on, these are the symptoms, this is what we need to do. And so, God here is using 4 different metaphors, so that, because if he told Israel what was wrong with them on his level, they would never understand. So he has to use these metaphors so they can easily relate to what God sees in their life. So as we look at these 4 symptoms and the 4 metaphors, God was giving this to us so that it's easier for us to comprehend. So let's continue reading in Hosea chapter 7. Starting in verse number 2, it says, "And they consider not in their hearts that I remember all their wickedness. Now their own doings have beset them about. They are before my face. They make the king glad with their wickedness, and the princes with their lies. They are all adulterers, as an oven heated by the baker, whom see the king, the princes have made him sick with bottles of wine. He stretched his hand with scorners, for they have made ready their heart like an oven. Whiles they lie in wait, their baker sleepeth all the night. In the morning it burneth as a flaming fire. They are all as hot as an oven. They have devoured their judges. All their kings are fallen. There is none among them that calleth unto me. Ephraim, he hath mixed himself among the people. Ephraim is a cake not turned. Strangers have devoured his strength, and he knoweth it not. Yea, gray hairs are here and there upon him, and he knoweth not. And the pride of Israel testifieth to his face, and they do not return to the Lord their God, nor seek him for all this. Ephraim also is like a silly dove, without heart. They call to Egypt, they go to Assyria. Let's pray real quick before we get into this. Dear God, I want to thank you for this day. I want to thank you for just this opportunity that you've given for me to preach your word, Lord. I pray that you'll just help everyone here to understand your word, Lord, and to understand the message that you've given to me. I'm so thankful for this great opportunity. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. So, looking at the first one, the first symptom that God gave to Israel, the first thing he saw was that he compared them to an oven. So, the number one is an oven here. Using this metaphor, he compared Israel, or Ephraim is another word that he used for Ephraim, for Israel. So he compared him to an oven. So, looking also at Job 24:15, it's up here. All my cross references I have up here, so you don't need to turn with it. You can just stay in Hosea. It's in Job 24:15, it says, "The eye also of the adulterer waiteth for the twilight, saying, No eye shall see me, and disguise his face." So, this oven, there's a few times in this setting of Scripture that God was using the oven to compare these people. First off, we see that they were burning with desire. They were burning with desire. So, we see that it called them several times. It says they are all adulterers, as an oven heated by the baker. So, just like an oven, at least specifically in this time, they didn't have convection ovens or anything like that. It was a fire-based oven, and so internally, they would start the fire, and it would start low, and it would be heating up internally, and eventually it would just be coming out. And so God uses this metaphor, an oven, to explain this burning desire that the Israelites had. They had a burning desire deep within them to commit sin, and as Pastor was talking about earlier, he's calling them adulterers. And they weren't specifically, which they may have been, but they weren't specifically cheating on their wives or anything like that. But they were being adulterous to God. They were following other gods, and as I was talking about with the kids just last week, when we were talking about adultery, it doesn't necessarily have to be between a man and a woman, but it was different, gods in their life. I used an example on Wednesday. We were talking about adultery as one of the 10 Commandments, and I used the example of, you had an opportunity to either to go to church, or you had an opportunity to stay home and play video games. Some of them definitely would like to stay home, play video games all day. And I use that as an example to say that when we do that in our life, we're using that as an idol, and we're being adulterous. So Israel here, in the same way, to other gods around them and things like that, they were being an adulterer, and they were burning with their lust inside them like the oven. And also, in addition to that, on top of the burning lust inside of them, that they were lying in wait. It says in verse number 6, it says, "For they have made ready their heart like an oven, whilst they lie in wait. Their baker sleepeth all the night. In the morning it burneth as a flaming fire." So, on top of that internal burning, but they were lying in wait. So, second one, they were lying in wait. So, God was using this example as an oven to talk about how, when if a baker left his oven burning all night, as it shows in this verse, that in the morning it burneth as a flame. So, whenever you have a flame oven, and you just, sometimes I know that I've accidentally left the oven on, and which that is dangerous. But in this time, if you had just an actual flame oven and you accidentally fell asleep, those ovens would not just be just get really hot and could burn something. The oven could get so big, the flame in the oven could get so big and out of control that it could burn down their whole house. And so we see that we see in the same way that this oven, it was burning with lust and just waiting for, they use this as the oven itself was waiting for that baker to fall asleep. And so the same way that these people, the Israelites, were waiting for their opportunity, as soon as they got their first opportunity, they were waiting to fulfill that burning lust that they had. And so God first compared them to an oven. And the next one was a cake. A cake. So in verse number 8 it says, "Ephraim, he hath mixed himself among the people. Ephraim is a cake not turned." And sort of to go along with the oven, in the same way, if you had an oven and you put in a cake and you just left it sit there, it's not a convection oven, so there's no heat around the whole thing. The heat is just on the bottom. So after one side gets cooked, you had to flip it on to the other side to then cook the bottom half. But God is showing this as a cake not turned. And so we can see that there's one half that's burnt and one half that's completely doughy. And so we look at, as we see that God is showing that the Israelites are, the first one, they're one extreme or the other. During this time, the time of these wicked kings, there'd be slight times of revival and things like that. There'd be a part where they were worshiping Baal. There'd be parts where they were worshiping God. And there were times of just extremes to one point to the other. And so God was saying how that this is how the people of the Israelites were. They were one extreme to the other. And in Psalms 106, it says, "But were mingled among the heathen, and learned their works, and they served their idols, which were a snare unto them." So this verse is showing that the Israelites, they mixed themselves. They weren't a peculiar people. They weren't individual and staying separated from the world as God had clearly told them. It was the exact reason why they had to go in the first place and get rid of everybody, all the Canaanites and the Jebusites and all the people that were already there. God told them to get rid of them because he knew how people were. He knew how we were. He knew how people were. And what would happen is all their gods would be mixed in with the Israelites' religion and all of that. Obviously, eventually it did happen, like God knew it would. And so it was just it was being mixed together. And also, on top of that, it was full of contradiction. The Israelites were full of contradiction. So, when you look at a cake that is both burnt and raw at the same time, that right there it's a contradiction to have a cake that is both raw and burnt. If you were to eat a cake like that, it definitely would be the worst of both worlds. God, He says in the New Testament that they were neither lukewarm or sorry, I should have wrote it down. It just came to they were lukewarm. They were neither hot nor cold, and He would spew them out of their mouth. And this is exactly what happened to the Israelites. They were burnt on one half. They were raw on the other, and if you were to have that cake, you would spew that out of your mouth. And so we see that God is comparing them to an oven and to a cake. He also compares it to gray hairs. This is one of my favorite of the metaphors. If I was, let's say I was a little bit older, and I was here for a long time, and then I went away for, let's say, 10 years, and then I finally came back, you would notice that I gained a lot of gray hairs and things like that. So it'd be really obvious if you went from not seeing me to seeing me, not seeing me for 10 years, and then you see me again. It's very obvious the gray hairs that appear. But in the same way that as Jude starts growing up, I won't be able, it's hard to tell when you're around somebody, when they start aging, it starts slowly progressing. And so you can't see those small things that happen. So God is showing that those gray hairs as a slow decay. It was a slow decay. So Israel, from all these all the things and the lust and the sin that was in their life, they were slowly decaying. They were slowly. He was relating gray hairs with that slow decay, and we can see that over the course of their entire life, we know that the story doesn't end good, and that God eventually He judges them for all the things that they did. But with that slow decay, we can see that they didn't even notice what was going on. So it's not even noticeable. It was not noticeable. So if I had, let's say Danny was with me for the next 10 years, and as he gets older, there'll be small things about him that changes. And if I'm with you every day or every other day, those are things that I would never notice. But if you had family in another state and you went to go see them, they would notice everything that changed about you. And so, in the same way that, I don't look in a mirror every day of my life. I don't notice everything that changes about me, but whenever I go to my family's house, like once a year or for Christmas, they can notice a lot of things that change about me. Because they have a reference to what I used to be. They have that clear picture of what I used to be. And so, because I don't notice the things that are changing, because I have no reference to what I used to look like. In the same way that Israel, with that slow decay and them not noticing, they didn't have any fixed reference to see what they were supposed to be doing. They in other verses they did that what was right in their own eyes. And so they didn't use the reference that was given to them by God, the law that they were given. So all these gray hairs were popping up, and they didn't even notice it. All these things in their life that was going wrong, all these things that kept happening, they didn't even notice what was coming for them. And then the fourth metaphor, we see a silly dove. In verse number 11, it says, Ephraim also is like a silly dove without heart. They call to Egypt, they go to Assyria. And also looking at Proverbs 7:23, it says, till a dart strike through his liver, as a bird hasteneth to a snare, he knoweth not that it is for his life. You know, studying for this message, I was learning about exactly how a dove acts and things like that. I was reading about how a dove can make a nest in a place, and it can be attacked. Things can eat its babies, and it'll just ignore all that and keep going back to its home where it's been attacked. And so God is comparing Israel like that dove is just ignoring all the signs, all these other symptoms. He's just ignoring like a silly dove. So all these symptoms before, because Israel was like a silly dove, they were just ignoring everything that was happening to them. And also, on top of just ignoring those things, they were easily enticed. They were easily enticed. In that second half of that verse, it says, they call to Egypt and they go to Assyria. So they were easily enticed by every place and everybody around them. Everybody that, told them that, oh, you don't need to worship that God. That's the old way of doing things. This is a new way to do something. That's just the old tradition. You don't need to follow that. As a silly dove, they were easily enticed to go somewhere else. They were easily enticed to bring new things into their religions, and so as a silly dove, they ignored all these other symptoms that was creeping up in their life, and they were just easily enticed to do all these things. And all of these symptoms that God has laid out in the Israelites' life, they lead to one gloomy diagnosis. And later in the story that we read, we see that this diagnosis it leads to Israelites' judgment. They're led away to captivity. There's a lot of things that happen to them that certainly does not. There's too much to talk about in this just one sermon, but all of this comes from a diagnosis of sin. Sin was the main root of the problem. It's a simple answer. It's a simple 3-letter word that just was the cause of all these things. Because all it took was the start of one little sin, one little thing, which led to generations of people not following God. And we look at this story of the Israelites and say, oh, that is them, and this is us. That would never happen to them. But I certainly hope not, but I don't think our church is nowhere near here yet, for any time. But just like hopefully every year we're going to the doctor, getting preventative care, getting a checkup. We need to look at these symptoms in our own life and the life of our church and see if we notice any of these symptoms going on in our own life. We can look and see if, do our lusts, do they burn to things that are not of God? Is our church mingled with the things of the world? Are we full of contradictions? Is there a slow decline or a decay that is coming in our own life? Are we just simply ignoring all these things? But before any of this happens, we can take preventative care. We can take up yearly checkups in our own life by doing the opposite of what the Israelites did. They stopped following the things of God. They stopped reading His Word. They stopped doing everything that He told them to do. And so that is how they thought that nothing was going wrong. They didn't even notice anything that was going wrong. It's because that they got out of God's Word, and so they had no focus. They had no fixed point to do this preventative care in their life. And so, as a church and as an individual, we need to take preventative maintenance and preventative care in our own life to just every once in a while, look at these symptoms and saying, oh, in my life, am I letting my lust burn towards the things not of God? Am I being full of contradictions? Am I slowly decaying? And just a slow decay is not something that's a big sin in your life that you think that's a big sin. But a slow decay is are you farther away from God yesterday than you were today? And if you are, that simply is a slow decay. And that should be a wake-up call to think, amen, has there ever been a time in my life that I've been closer to God than today? Yeah. And if that answer is yes, then we can see that some of these symptoms are popping up in our life. And if we can find one, maybe there's another. And all this is found by reading His Word and comparing our life with His Word and changing the course of what could happen in our own life if all of this goes unignored. Let's pray. Dear God, I want to thank You for this day. I want to thank You for just the Word that You've given to me, Lord. And I pray that as an individual, everyone here takes short account of everything that is happening in their life and comparing it with Your Word, Lord. I just pray that this was a help to everyone here today, just to take a look into their own life